Hey, welcome back to the ZT Audio channel. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that seems to come up over and over on the various internet forums, and that is how do you create a keyboard rig using an iPad? You can also do it with an iPhone, by the way, which surprises a lot of people. But we're going to kind of go into this, and we're approaching this from the standpoint of you got a keyboard that you want to either add the capabilities of the iPad to it for creating sound, or you want to go the route of having all the sound come out of the iPad altogether, just like you were using a laptop type rig with MainStage or something like that. But you don't want to use a laptop. You've got an iPad or an iPhone, and those are great portable solutions. So obviously we need the iPad and the iPhone. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But also, if we're going to put this together, we're going to need some kind of a keyboard. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit involved. Now I'll tell you a couple choices that we'll have to come back to. All of these keyboards that I've got sitting in the room here with me have this in common, and that is that they will transmit MIDI information, either through the 5-pin MIDI ports on the back or over USB. For our purposes, we're going to use USB. However, there's an additional thing that gets into this. Not all of these keyboards will transmit audio over USB. That requires something called class-compliant audio over USB. Quite a mouthful, but what it means is that that same USB cable, that same single cable that you're using, will be able to transmit audio back to the keyboard, and the keyboard will be able to act as an audio interface. Now, the Keystage 61 that I've got here, this is brand new in my studio, has that feature, so it'll work just fine for this. This is just a controller and just an audio interface. It does not have any sound making capability of its own. Very similar in that respect is the IK Multimedia, what is this, iRig Pro IO49, something like that. It also has, it's just a dumb controller, but it has an audio interface built into it. What that gets us around is that we don't have to buy a separate audio interface, something that I'll discuss later in this video. There are also things like the Phantom here. The Phantom will transmit audio and MIDI over USB. However, it requires you to use a specialized driver, and that specialized driver is something that iPads and iPhones just don't use. So if you have something like this, it's not going to work. Some things that might work are the Korg Keystage again, the Korg Nautilus and Kronos support this. Various Yamaha keyboards, including the Montage, the Mo DX, the CK line. I believe the YC line also supports audio and MIDI over USB. Studio Logic's Numa and Numa X lines support that. That's not anywhere near an exhaustive list, but it'll give you some idea that this is something that you're going to have to look out for. Obviously, if you buy the things that I've noted, you're in good shape and you won't have to look into this. So get one of those and you'll be fine. If you don't have that, and you're not going to get that, or you have a keyboard that does not support class-compliant audio over USB, you're going to need an audio interface, and that's something that we'll come back to later in this video. So we've got our iPad, we've got our keyboard. What else do we need? Well, our big problems are how do I get MIDI in and out of my iPad or my iPhone? How do I get audio out of my MIDI, out of my iPad or my iPhone? And how do I keep the thing charged while I'm using it? Because, you know, these things can take a lot of power. So right off the bat, you use this thing called a camera kit adapter, or a camera adapter for your iOS Apple device. This one happens to be lightning based. You can get them for USB-C as well, and this allows us to do a couple of things. One, we're going to take a typical charging cable from our Apple line of products. This is an official Apple, but you know what the heck, it works. And so there's our lightning on one end, and then that's what we would plug into our power brick on the other end, or a power cube. I recommend you get a power cube that is as powerful as you can get and supports as much wattage as you can get away with, because that might allow you to just have one power cable to run everything. It might even run the keyboard for you, as you'll see when I plug this into the Keystage from Korg later on. So that gets us power. The second thing we need to have is something called a USB printer cable. And a USB printer cable looks like this. It's got that USB connector on one end, and it's got this, what we think of as a printer connector on the other end, because that's usually what the outlet or the port looks like on your computer when you plug a computer, when you connect one by USB. So this goes in here, this end goes in here. The other end is going to go into the host port on your keyboard, and it's going to look just like the printer cable port would look on a printer. So we need that. So with the Apple connection kit and these two cables, this is pretty much all we need for connecting the iPad and the keyboard together. Additionally, you're going to want some kind of an audio output from your keyboard. And in this case, we're going to have a stereo pair that would come out of that. One end would go to the keyboard, the other end would go to your mixer. All the audio from the iPad will come out through that keyboard to your mixer by this connection. In some cases, depending upon how your setup is, you might want a cable that looks like this. It's an headphone jack on one side, and it's those same 1/4-inch jacks on the other. This would come out of the headphone output on your iOS device, and this would go to your mixer. This is for cases where you're using a keyboard that doesn't have that USB audio compliance feature, but you do have a headphone port, and for your purposes, that might be good enough without using an external audio interface. We'll discuss that as we go along. So that's pretty much everything we need. In some cases, as I said, you might want that external audio interface. For a iPad or iPhone-based rig, I would recommend the TC Helicon Go Twin Pro, I think this is called. It's very much like a lot of interfaces that look the same. This does work better in one important way, and it does allow you, better than the others, to keep your iPad or your iPhone charged up while it's in use. So if you get this will likely come with all the cables that you need to hook this up to your iPad. You only need this if you're using a keyboard that does not support class-compliant audio over USB. Our purposes today, we're probably not going to get into that until later in the video, maybe a second part of this video. So let's get into how you hook this up. So we've got our Apple camera connection kit. One end of our USB to printer connection is plugged in there. The other end of our connection there is plugged into the laptop, or the keyboard that we're going to use. And then we're going to plug in our lightning connector here. And then the Apple connection kit, camera connection kit, goes into our lightning port in the back here. I'm using the key stage here, the cord key stage, because it kind of makes it easy, because they got this nice little lid that goes on here, this nice little tray, I should say. So that's how that connection works. And then I'm going to connect this to the wall over there where I've got a charging connection. And I'm going to connect this end to the back of the key stage, or, in your case, whatever keyboard you've got. And sorry about the autofocus being a little wanky here. Now, it happened off camera, but one of the things that's neat about this is there's enough power from that power brick that I'm using in the wall that it will power not only the laptop, or I should say the iPad, and you can see that it's charging there. Again, sorry about the autofocus, but at the same time, it's actually powering my key stage controller. That will be the case with some controllers. Others will require you to have its own separate power supply. You're used to those wall warts, you know how they work. Now, since we're using a controller that has its own built-in audio interface, what I've got to do now is I've got to hook up the outputs of this to my sound system, to my PA system or my mixer, whatever I'm using. So if I go around the back here, I'm going to plug the right into the right and the left into the left, just like you typically would do, okay? The other end, of course, is going to go to my sound system, my PA system, my mixer. So far as our hookups, our physical hookups are concerned, we're ready to go. Well, what else do we need? Well, we need some kind of an app on the iPad or the iPhone in question that's going to make the sound. I'm going to make a recommendation based on experience for new users, and I'm going to do it for a couple of reasons. One, you can get these things, the LE versions of them or the basic versions of them, for free, and later on you can decide what you want to do in terms of buying any of the in-app purchases that are available for them to expand them. And the other reason is because they're very easy to work with without using any kind of a host program or something like that. So one of them I would suggest is Korg's module application, and that's what this looks like starting up. This is kind of like if you had a basic workstation program with a lot of different sounds in it that you wanted to play. And so there's electric pianos. You can see up here I've got acoustic pianos, electric pianos, organs, clavinets, strings, choir, brass, wind, synth, bell, mallet. Now some of these are things that I've done purchases after the fact, but the fact of the matter is you can do an awful lot with just this. And if you're just looking for something that's a basic system that allow you to maybe do some splits, have some synthesizer sounds and all the typical sounds that you'd use, pianos, electric pianos, organs, that kind of thing, this is a pretty good way to go. The second app that I would recommend heartily, I would say, is going in here. Wrong one. Studio Logic makes a program called Numa Player, and it's kind of the same thing. You've got acoustic pianos, electric pianos, keyboard sounds that include organs, vibes, things like that, and you've also got a strings and pad section. Honestly, either one of these programs by themselves, depending upon what you're doing and playing out live, this may be all you need. And you'll notice here, just calling up the program already, it's just plain working. There's some configuration involved, and I'll talk about what that is. Starting with Numa Player, we'll hit the button up here, and there's a button that says Audio Midi. Our audio driver is iOS audio. That's fine. Our output device is also iOS audio. That pretty much means the key stage. The key stage is an iOS audio device. Output channels, key stage 1 and 2, sample rate. If we want to set that, some machines will support a faster sample rate and it'll sound a little bit better. We've also got something called our buffer size. Generally speaking, the lower your buffer size, the more responsive that the keyboard is going to feel to you, the less latency you'll have. And the higher settings are used when maybe you're not using as powerful a machine and you're getting audio cutouts and stuff like that. That's something you'll want to fool around with and see what works best for you. My MIDI inputs here, well, all I really want to use is the key stage keyboard control. And any interfaces that you have hooked up, they will all appear under these menus, which is kind of a neat thing when you're using iOS. It doesn't always happen with Macs and with Windows laptops. It seems to be a little bit more well put together in that sense on iOS. One of the advantages of going this way. So we're going to use only the keyboard control. We're not going to use the network session. You can, in most cases, use a Bluetooth keyboard as well. So there are a number of Bluetooth keyboards out there that you could add a separate keyboard just for controlling sound. Just for controlling the playing it, so you could have a dual keyboard rig, 2 keyboards going at once, but you wouldn't even have to have a physical connection to the iPad in order to make it work. That's kind of a neat way to do that. Let's not do that for now. But right off the bat, I've got Numa Player working here, and I've got an acoustic grand set up. I can control volume and things like that from the iPad itself, or I can control it from the sound system as well. Kind of doing the same thing with Module. I'll open it this way. Again, I've already got Module pre-configured so that it kind of works with this. So here's my acoustic grand. Many acoustic pianos available. Some of these are that I bought separately. Obviously, I've got organ sounds. If I select them, strings and choirs. And you can tell the sound quality, even though you're listening to it only through the microphone on the iPhone that I'm using to record this, is actually pretty good. So there you go. Again, to configure this, they've got one of these little cog buttons up here is how that you get to that. And here you can set all those same settings. What do you want it to, how do you want it to work? What MIDI channels are going to work on? What, is it doing Bluetooth, MIDI, all that kinds of stuff. You can go to advanced settings. That usually has to do with things like setting your sample rates, audio rate in the background, how many voices of polyphony you want it to use, stuff like that. So the configuration is pretty easy. In most cases, it's pretty close to plug and play. So there we go. If we have a class-compliant audio controller, like the key stage here, that's as simple as it gets. If you want to get a little more fancy, you can start diving into using programs like something called AUM, that's A-U-M, or Camelot Pro. I've got AUM, I don't have Camelot Pro on this iPad right now, but those are programs that are going to give you more of main stage type capability. If you're familiar with Apple Main Stage, or perhaps something like Gig Performer or Cantabile on a Windows-based machine, it gives you similar capabilities. I've got AUM, and what AUM allows you to do is to create your own performance setups and switch between them easily. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this button, and I'm going to say, give me a audio unit extension, because that's what all of these instruments are. And I've got all kinds of plugins that I've bought here. Most of these that you're seeing right now come from something called Chord Gadget. Again, I strongly recommend buying that program, because what it does for you more than anything else is immediately it gives you all of these additional audio plugins that you can use in addition to those that you'd otherwise have. So I've got all the stuff that I've shown you so far, including Module Pro and Numa Player, and things like the Model D plugin from Moog. That's a mini Moog plugin, and OXBD, which is a pretty good Oberheim type synthesizer. So I'm going to choose audio unit extensions, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to call up something called, what's it called? It's called, where is it? Phoenix. And Phoenix is another instrument that is very like an Oberheim. As a matter of fact, it looks a little bit like an Oberheim here. And so I think I've got something else running in the background, don't I? I've still got Module Pro running in the background. Let's make sure this is set up. Settings, sample rate, buffer size, output route, key stage, input mic, blah, blah, blah. I got all that going. But I might have a problem with my MIDI setup. Here I go. This is a little more involved because it allows you to do more things. So I've got my keyboard control for my key stage here. I've got the Phoenix. I hit the button that connects the two. And now I'm using an Oberheim sounding virtual synthesizer within AUM. And of course, everybody wants you to go. Everybody wants you to do that whenever you do an Oberheim. So or Camelot Pro on the iPad is your way to get that main stage type functionality where you can very quickly change between different setups, splits, layers, all that kind of stuff. It also is going to make it a lot easier if you use something like or Camelot Pro to use multiple keyboards, because this single iPad you can hook up multiple keyboards to it. I've seen rigs where people have gone crazy and they've got like 3-4 controllers hooked up to here, and all of them are just dumb controllers not doing anything, but all the sound is coming from the iPad. So that's kind of the basics of using an iPad if you have a controller that has a built-in audio interface. What do you do if you don't have a built-in audio interface? If your keyboard does not come with a built-in audio interface that is iOS compliant, again, USB class compliant audio over USB. I think I kind of said that out of order, but you get the idea. This is where you're going to want to use an external interface, something like the Go Twin from TC Electronics. There are a number of things like this available from a number of other manufacturers. IK Multimedia makes a pretty good one. I've got experience with that one and a couple of others. I would choose the Go Twin for a couple of reasons. One of them is it makes the process of keeping your iPad charged a little simpler. Now, it will run off of batteries, okay? But there is also a power port on the back where you can buy, and this is a separate purchase, a DC in power port. It also comes with all the cables you need to hook up the Twin to your iPad. And now this takes the place of all those other cables. You've got a audio output here that you would use instead of the audio outputs on the back of your keyboard. You've got a headphone jack, you've got a level, you've got direct, you've actually got a couple of audio ins here that you can plug a microphone into, so that if you want to, you can record on your iPad, stuff like that. Your outputs, like I said, that goes to your audio system. Well, how do you get MIDI into this? Well, one of two things is going to happen, and I'm going to recommend you go a particular way. Like I said, it comes with all the cables you need, and some of the cables that you get are these things called Mini MIDI or TRS MIDI to MIDI DIN. And in this case, what you would do is there's these little jacks on the side here. Where are they? Here they are on the front. So here's MIDI in and out. If I'm going to take MIDI in, I would plug this to the actual MIDI out jack on the back of my computer, on the back of my keyboard, I mean. So the output from your keyboard sending the MIDI signals comes to the Go Twin. That gets MIDI to this, and then the output audio comes from the interface. And then you can continue to use whatever keyboard you're using this from, all by itself. This is one of the things that I would do with my Phantom, for instance, since it doesn't have an audio interface that's iOS or iPad compliant. I could use this to connect my Phantom up and still use the iPad with it. So where do we go from there? Well, where we go from there is you've got to kind of play with this a little bit. I would recommend downloading that Korg module program that I showed earlier. That's a good place to go, or the Numa player, one of those two things. I've shown you all the connections that you should probably have to use. I've kind of shown you the basics of how to hook it up. From there, it takes a little bit of fooling around on your part, but most of it is pretty straightforward. And I think that once you explore these options and figure out exactly what works for your case, you're well on the way to being able to use an iPad either as your sole source of sounds with controllers, or using your iPad along with other keyboards, electric pianos, MIDI-capable instruments, and synthesizers in your rig. That's all I have for you today, and I hope that some of this was at least a little bit helpful or enlightening. Please use the comments section to ask any questions, and I'll try to get to them time allowing. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.